find situations when they are influenced by their background, cultural environment, and personal experiences. This is exactly what is happening. The unconscious bias acts as a barrier to equality. It prevents us from cultivating diverse talent and developing an engaged workforce, unquote. This is not visible. This is not something we can show on a piece of paper. This only happens when I am sitting as a vice chancellor of a university in a selection committee. Suddenly when the experts come and ask me, sir, what is your preference? And my looking at somebody makes an entire change. And that looking at somebody is something which cannot be explained. It does happen not only in India, but in many other countries as well, where denial of religious accommodation is most common form of workplace religious discrimination. Say, I was reading the Miami Herald, an ex-city manager in Homestead, Florida, he is suing the city for religious discrimination, claiming that his employer refused to promote him because he was a Muslim. 2, recently, I think National University of Law is aware, a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court, just recently upheld a Muslim airman's discharge from Air Force for keeping a beard. We were just now listening that it doesn't happen in other places. It does happen here. And we can't close our eyes. There are many such instances, but interestingly, I would like to tell our outside guests from this country that there are also instances where employees' religious and cultural needs at workplace are being accommodated by the employers. For example, prayer rooms for employees of the various faiths by Tech Mahindra. Now, I don't think it makes him more secular or more communal or less secular. Tata, Starbucks allow staff to do religious rituals of their choice while opening a new store. And then a special 90-minute break, I think most of us know it, will be given to the government employees from Muslim community in Uttarakhand for Friday prayers. There are good things. There are good things which is, give me one and a half minute, ma'am, I'm looking at it. And I'm seeking 2 minutes from the Vice Chancellor also. This is what has been termed as, what our first speaker was saying, reasonable accommodation. I think what does it impact is described as one that eliminates the employer's conflict between his religious practices and work requirements and does not cause an undue hardship to the employer. But I think in our country, in India, it goes beyond reasonable accommodation and mostly triggered by what I said just now, implicit bias. What can we do? We leave whenever we make an intervention, we leave these things just halfway. I think it's our duty to also suggest what is the way forward. Just 4 sentences. 1, I think that will make some difference. Acknowledging that discrimination is a problem. Let us first acknowledge that discrimination is a problem. Let us not deny it. Let us not run away from it. Can institutions like NALSAR, Professor Faizan, like NALSAR, and any other institution, MANU or any other where we have the people, can you develop a mechanism for addressing unfair treatment in the workplace, if there is any? Let us not wait for heavens to come down. Can we monitor discriminatory practices on a regular basis? Can we document and reward good practices in fighting religious discrimination? And finally, can we also introduce in number of these organizations, let us introduce pledge. The way we take pledge for, extremism, terrorism, let's have a pledge that each institution will ask its members to take that we believe and we promise we will not do any religious discrimination. I think, when government systems fail, we go to judiciary. I am myself a victim, and you need years to wait for the judiciary. If you are lucky, you get something. Otherwise, you die before the judgment comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I call upon Mr. Sampson? Gandhi, you want me to move away so that people can... He's the Executive Director of Person to Person Institute for Christian Counseling, Secunderabad. I'm afraid we only have 10 minutes for you.
Yes, ma'am. You have PPT? Yes. Good evening to one and all, to the distinguished delegates on the dais and in the audience, and my hearty thanks to the Vice Chancellor of the Nalsar University, Professor Faizan. Thank you, sir, for this beautiful opportunity to be able to present a few thoughts on this topic of religion and workplace. To me, religion is personal, not in terms of excluding another, but it is personal in terms of the fact that it flows from a power that I source in a relationship with God. And to me, religion is not exclusive as I practice it, but religion is in fellowship with fellow human beings. So if you want me to summarize what I believe as a praxis of religion and workplace, it flows from age-old fathers, Catholic fathers' belief, or a credo, which says lex orandi, lex credendi, and lex vivendi. This is in Latin, but what it means is the rule of worship determines the rule of belief, which determines your rule of living. We have a beautiful saying which says, Manava Sevaye Madhava Seva. Service to humanity, what it means is service to humanity is service to humankind. I believe there is truth in it. But there is a subtle difference. If you were to look at this, the source of your existence, your meaning, purpose, and living is drawn from the rule of worship. And we have seen earlier in the morning and in the afternoon how important is worship in every religion. So who or what we worship determines what we believe. So it's not just enough that one has a personal relationship with God, but it's also important as to what is the creed that I bring with me. What is the belief system that I have with me? And therefore, it is important as to what is our religious text, and more importantly, we have been emphasizing on exegesis, but I would also ask a question, should we not look at the epistemology? How do I know what I know? When we want to test the efficacy of drugs, when we want to test the efficacy and the purity of all the valuables that we possess, how much more important it is to be able to study, understand, and come to a conclusion of our own as to what is my epistemology of what I believe. Or else, we will be probably a part of a cacophony. And then comes the essential, absolutely non-negotiable action that you prove what you believe in your day-to-day life. Therefore, when the Jewish community expanded the 10 commandments to more than 1,600 laws, an expert in the law came to Jesus and said, "Well, which is the greatest commandment?" And he did not tell you, what do you read and what do you make of it? And the expert in the law, he said, love your God and love your neighbor. You have said it correctly. Go live and you're not far from the kingdom of heaven. In other words, the role of the religion must be to reduce the play of laws and rendering of justice in the courts of law and minimize it. But on the contrary, we seem to be expanding laws and laws. Jesus came, and as a faith leader, I would believe him personally as a son of God, as the Son of God. As a faith leader, he not only reduced the law to 2, and he also went on to interpret, exegesis. And his hermeneutics were shocking to the people of his day. For example, he said, you say that, when you commit an act of adultery, yes, you have committed adultery. But I say to you that even if you look at a woman lustfully, you have committed adultery. That was his new interpretation, where he put everybody in their place, not in humiliation, but to be able to examine themselves. How does this all play out in the workplace? How do we bring our religion into our workplace? To be able to show off, to be able to dominate, to be able to subvert, or to be able to minister. Insecure people manipulate others, and secure people minister to others. And the difference that this kind of the way we can become secure is to be able to draw our strength from our faith. We need to be, I'll give a couple of examples as to how this plays out in our workplaces. I read a newspaper report somewhere in the north, it could happen anywhere in India, somewhere in the north, that there is a government teacher, and probably he would earn something like around 30,000 rupees. But he has done a very smart thing, quote unquote. He hired an unemployed youth for 5,000 rupees, and he asked him to go and teach in his place, and he went on to do other business of his own and increase his lot. Is this an economic issue? Is this a legal issue? Is this a religious issue, sociological issue? How do we look at this in a country like India? If you look at another aspect, I'll just make this point and close because she showed me 3 minutes already. I'm amazed how time flies. Abraham Maslow, some of you would recall, was a social economist, and he observed the social phenomena, and he says that people meet their personal needs in this fashion. The physical needs, the safety and the security needs thereafter, and thereafter the social esteem and self-actualization. Now, our economic policies, our government policies, all of them try to follow this. But if you look at what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 verse 33, he said, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." In other words, Jesus, in a manner of speaking, inverted the pyramid and said, start from here. Start from self-actualization. Now, here is my 1 minute worth of suggestions of how one could bring about changes in the workplace. One, I would say, one of the greatest mechanism, delivery system that is there in the entire world. It is the mosques, it is the temples, and it is the churches. Whether you like it or not, you have the priests, you have the mullahs, and you have the clergy. But instead of finding fault, yes, they have their own scruples. Instead of finding fault with them, these people represent an amazing machinery. How could we tap into these resources? And I heard the previous speakers also say that when people listen from their priests and the mullahs and the clergy, they will obey and listen. There is a transformation. But not so much as the legal luminaries or the politicians or others. So how do we draw them into this process and make sure that they teach what they ought to be teaching, not the personal laws, but the spiritual laws, which alone can bring about transformation from within instead of fighting a losing battle of transformation without. So this is my presentation. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. That's an interesting takeaway. Thank you so much. May I invite Department of Women's Education, Maulana Azad National Urdu University. Are you going to speak to us in Urdu?
Pardon, sir?
Are you going to speak to us in Urdu?
No. Some other day, madam, definitely. I would like to, at the outset, thank Professor Faizan Mustafa for inviting me, giving this opportunity to speak on a very alien subject. I was expecting myself to be accommodated in somewhere gender count. But anyway, since the topic is given, and then I would like to quickly read the papers. Later we can just discuss, ma'am. 10 minutes? Fine. Whilst freedom of religion is well established as fundamental right internationally, the extent to which it should be enjoyed in the workplace is still the subject of some debate. Religion is one of the key facets of diversity, along with race, gender, disability, and age. And examining religion at work is definitely a challenge. At a time of international debate over religious conflict and tolerance, workforces in various parts of the world are more diverse than ever before. Increasingly, the workplace is a significant public sphere in which people of varied religious perspectives encounter one another. The standard approaches in leadership studies, organizational culture, and human resource management pay inadequate attention to religious beliefs and practices at work. Labeling either religion or business as private is descriptively inaccurate and morally problematic. The religious commitment of employees find their way into the workplace in one way or the other. Whether or not managers or scholars acknowledge it, managers should create conditions under which employees are able to express the religion at work within certain moral standards, constraints. Religion and spirituality are, for many employees, central to their identities. From the perspective of the employer, however, they can be distracting or divisive influences. Douglas Hicks, much influenced by, offers a model of respectful pluralism, asserting that the task of effective and ethical leadership in an organization is not to promote a single spiritual or religious framework, but rather to create an environment in which managers and employees can respectfully express their own beliefs and practices. The quest for a framework of respectful pluralism in the workplace is for a moral, not a legal framework, but it does assume a legal framework of equality under the law that should apply to all citizens. Notwithstanding the legal, moral, and practical issues raised with the wider national approaches, such practices are fascinating examples of negotiation and compromise in religiously diverse workplaces. Rao also strongly feels that to avoid serious conflict based on religion, the firms make small accommodations such as providing vegetarian food, times off for observances and flexible schedules to meet the religious commitment of the employees. How respectful pluralism should operate in the workplace attempts to broaden the liberal framework while upholding its concern that citizens and employees communicate to each other in ways that respect other citizens or co-workers. The political legal position does not adequately recognize that people can communicate on their own terms across religious, spiritual and moral divides. Workers can uphold mutual respect towards co-workers even as they practice their pluralistic religious commitments at workplace. Employees should have the freedom to draw upon the religiosity-based ideas and symbols as they work. They should feel free to explain their beliefs to their co-workers and how their beliefs affect the way they approach their work. Like Parsons and Rawls perspectives, however, the framework does contain a strong presumption against institutional use of religious language and symbols because of its potential to coerce or degrade employees from differing on minority grounds. Attempts to translate religiously particular values into common spiritual and secular values are reductionist at best and inaccurate at worst. There is a need to encourage pluralistic debates, inclusion of multiple perspectives. In order to construct respectful pluralism, there should be a substantive views concerning human dignity, equal respect, non-coercion, non-degradation, etc. that are not usually held, universally held. It is possible to specify the moral features of respectful pluralism organizations. The circumstances of contemporary workplace are a challenge to which respectful pluralism is a proposed response. The assertion is not on the nature of workplace, but with a series of basic assertions about the employee as a human person. The specific concerns and contextual factors of the workplace should fit within the general moral understanding of the human being. The most fundamental claim of the framework is that all persons possess an inviolable human dignity. If the assumption that each person possesses human dignity is granted, the next claim is that every human being deserves to be accorded respect. The third next claim is that every human being deserves to be accorded respect. The third assertion is that all human beings deserves to be possess equal dignity and that deserves equal respect. Since human dignity is not based on human merit or distinctive features of some people or not others, there is not justifiable reason to differentiate in the degree of respectful treatment due each person. Given that excluding any person would constitute a differentiation among people, the scope of equality must extend to all people. Whether moral equality exists among human beings, rather a central contested moral question is equality of what? What conditions must be operative in the workplace relationships to guarantee equal respect for all employees and employer? Adam Smith, the moral philosopher, founder of classical economics, observes, justice is the main pillar that upholds the whole edifice of society. How vital to an individual's sense of human dignity is the